Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Wall Street Journal Potomac Watch podcast, and I'm here with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. And let's turn to the House and the Senate. I think everybody assumes that the House, where Republicans have a 4-seat advantage, is a toss-up. It could go either way and probably goes to the party that wins the White House. I say probably because though Biden won the White House in 2020, Republicans gained seats. I think, 14 or so, 11. It was in the low single digits in 2020. So that could happen again because this is based on a relatively narrow group of seats. Some people think that only 30 are really competitive at all. So the House is very much up for grabs. I don't want to get too much into the detail of what races are going to be decisive here. I want to turn instead to the Senate, which is also up for grabs, but a narrower set of seats that seem to be competitive. Right now, the Republicans seem to be safe with about 50 seats, including West Virginia, a pickup of one. That's Joe Manchin's seat. And they're trying to go for that magic 51, which would give them the majority, even if Kamala Harris wins the White House. And they are confident, increasingly confident, that they are doing that in Montana, where Tim Sheehy, an entrepreneur, is ahead. Latest poll I've heard, private poll, is that he's up by 4 over John Tester, the incumbent. If he wins that gets 51. But Republicans would like to pile up more victories because this is going to be the best Senate cycle they have for some time. And yet they're finding that additional seat elusive. Kyle, what they've got is Bernie Moreno running against Sherrod Brown in Ohio, seems to be still trailing. The states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan all have competitive elections, but Wisconsin seems to be the one that is closing fastest with Eric Hovda, a businessman, against Tammy Baldwin. And then Pennsylvania is also closing, where Dave McCormick, again, a business entrepreneur, former Treasury official, is running against Bob Casey, the longtime incumbent. The latest information I get from some Republicans monitoring this race is that they think they'll get to 52, but they can't tell you which seats they'll get to 52.
Yeah, part of the dynamic here is just that the map for Republicans in the Senate this year is so good for them. They're only defending 11 seats, and Democrats are defending 23 seats, including some of these states that look pretty red at the presidential level. Ohio, Wisconsin, and Michigan, more toss-ups, but certainly winnable for President Trump. And so my read of this is pretty close to that. With the West Virginia seat and a probable win by Tim Sheehy in Montana, you can probably guess that Republicans are going to control the Senate. And then maybe they can get one of those or maybe two of those other seats. But I think you're exactly right that the reason this matters is the 2026 map for them is nowhere near as favorable. John Ossoff in Georgia will be up for re-election. So that is a state where Republicans are probably feeling pretty good that they can do a pickup in 2026. But Susan Collins in Maine is one that could easily go the other direction. And then there are many seats where it is a tougher slog for either party. Colorado, Iowa, Joni Ernst's seat is up, but no real clear pickup targets. And so part of why this matters is if you have a Harris administration in the White House, a Republican Senate for these first 2 years totally changes the conversation about what is doable in Washington. But if Democrats can get the Senate back after 2026, that's then when they could do the kinds of things that she's promising, including eliminating the filibuster to codify Roe v. Wade and abortion protections nationwide.
Kim, this is the stage of an election campaign where the surprises emerge, right? The Senate surprises. In 2014, Ed Gillespie in Virginia almost caught up to Mark Warner in Virginia and lost narrowly, in part because the GOP party apparatus didn't give him money and they might have carried him over the top. But nonetheless, you see these surges, these late surges often. And I wonder if you think that there are a couple of potential Democratic pickups this year. One in Texas, Colin Allred, a member of Congress, former football player, running against Ted Cruz. The latest private poll had it at 1 point, Ted Cruz winning. And then Deb Fischer, the Republican incumbent in Nebraska, is only narrowly ahead of her independent candidate who's being backed. There's an independent on the ballot. I forget his first name, Osborne, who is challenging her, but is supported by Democrats. And that seems surprisingly close. Republicans, I know, blame her for a lack of attention to the race, a lack of fundraising. And the question from some of the big super PACs on the Republican side is, should they take another $10 million out of other races and send it to Fisher's race in an emergency?
The Democratic targets up until now had been Ted Cruz, as you mentioned, but also Rick Scott in Florida. Very interesting dynamic in Florida. A lot of the polls are showing that he's doing very well there, despite having almost lost that race when he ran 6 years ago. A lot of people, by the way, are crediting this to Governor Ron DeSantis, who has simply really turned the state more red and cushioned Scott a bit. So they're less worried about that race. The Texas race, I doubt it's actually down to 1 point. Texas is that perennial wish list of Democrats. Oh, it's going to go blue. It's going to go blue. They often swing and miss. Ted Cruz is certainly concerned. The Cruz campaign knows that they need to really sort of up their game in the last few weeks here. The Fisher race is the big surprise. And yes, there is some real grumpiness in the party right now, feeling that she wasn't paying enough attention to this because of the consequences of it and the choices that now have to be made. We were just talking about these 4 or 5 potential pickups, but the Republicans overall are outspent this cycle. Money is leaner for them, and those choices are hard. So you get groups like the Senate Leadership Fund, which is aligned with Mitch McConnell. They just announced a big buy, $17 million in Wisconsin, about that much in Michigan, the Michigan race. If they have to peel off some of those dollars to go defend a Republican they never thought was going to be in trouble, that really hurts their prospects because there just isn't a lot of money to go around. Now, what we don't know is how much of this is Democrats getting the press to pick up this issue and run with it to try to cause Republicans to worry about places and spend their money elsewhere. That's part of politics as well, too. But you are right. These are some of the surprises. I would wager there will be a couple more in the next weeks.
Oh, really? Well, pray tell. What are
that's the definition of the word surprise, Paul.
But, where would you be looking?
Oh, I mean, I guess in the Senate races, maybe a change again in what's going on in Florida, maybe in any of these races, by the way, the dreaded opposition research that comes out that it's less likely with these candidates because they've been in office and they're vetted, but you just never know. Sometimes the other side can gin up some issues that take hold in the final weeks. I think there also might be, if you look at the House too, Paul, just to go back, there's a couple of really interesting people like Scott Perry, who is a longtime Republican. He's facing some troubles in races. So I think that this is spread around the House and the Senate.
He's in Pennsylvania, right?
In Pennsylvania, correct.
Yeah, he's one of the fire breathers on the Republican side who have been so hard to manage from the leadership perspective. All right, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we'll have more on the battle over who's going to turn out the voters when we come back. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. All right, I can't go without pinning you down here on this question of, should you ignore the polls for the last 3 weeks, Kyle, just for the sake of sanity, because nobody really knows what the turnout's going to be. Nobody knows how these imponderables are going to be. Hard to resist the temptation to jump at polls because it's really addictive. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think ignore individual polls and maybe even ignore the averages as long as they are looking as tight as they are right now, unless one of these candidates looks like he or she is building a 2 or 3 or 4 point lead. On the other hand, for people who are interested in this and wondering who is going to lead the country over the next 4 years and what policies may flow from that, ignoring the polls might be worse for your sanity because then you'll be sitting around stewing, wondering what the polls are saying.
And Kim?
So I would ignore the polls. Although what I find fascinating, Paul, is that the campaigns are not. So this week, for instance, the Harris campaign has decided it's going to micro-target and shore up its support with Black men, that particular demographic. And they are announcing these new initiatives. They're going to have a new training program for Black men to get them into high-demand jobs and focus more on health issues that affect Black men. And there's going to be a new loan program, small business loan program targeted at Black men. And one of the things that some Democratic pollsters are more worried about, they fear this is a forest for the trees thing. They point out that, well, you can maybe bump those numbers up a little bit, but if you are overall not orienting your campaign around getting broader turnout, that's going to hurt you far more than losing a couple of points with this demographic or that demographic. So I might ignore the polls, but expect the next 3 weeks to see the campaigns continue to micro-target some of these groups based on the polls.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that she is doing this to target Black men 3 weeks out of the campaign. When you're doing that on a core group, it does mean that you are focusing less on the still undecided middle of the electorate, though I guess maybe those young Black men are this part of this year's undecideds, which doesn't bode well for Harris unless you can get them back. All right. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day with Potomac Watch for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Thank you for listening.